Okay, class. Welcome to the plant conservation video. Now, what you see here right off the bat, it's a cactus, and actually this is a mutated one. You can see it's crested, that's what it's called. But typically, if you look in the bottom right, that's what this plant looks like naturally and normally. This is Scleracactus brevispinus, or Perriette cactus. And why it's called Perriette cactus is because it's found in the Perriette draw, which is a very small area, kind of out by Vernal and Roosevelt and Duchesne, and near the Green River area. Why do I have it on this first slide? Because it is an endangered plant species found here in Utah. And we're going to talk about some of the threats that are causing plants like this to become endangered. So I'm just going to read this because it segues into what a lot of this lesson is going to be about. And plant conservation is a broad group of activities which aims to prevent plants from becoming extinct. It includes the direct conservation of wild populations, collection of plants within gardens, education programs, invasive species control, recovery and restoration work, research programs, training, etc. Now, it's pretty recognized that the focus of plant conservation is these things, and a lot of it directs towards conservation. So, or excuse me, towards plant diversity within communities. And as we come through the rest of these slides, you'll see that plant conservation and biodiversity go hand in hand. And all of these programs and gardens, invasive species control, all of this is something that is going to help with increasing biodiversity within plant communities. So as I stated before, plant conservation is directed at protecting plant biodiversity. Now, maybe to back up a little bit, or at least to touch on something that will go in more depth, is why we care about this. Why do we care about plant biodiversity? Why do we care about conserving plants? Now, we as human beings use plants every single day in every single part of our lives. You're probably wearing some plant material. You probably ate plant material earlier. And if you ate meat, that meat ate plant material. The desk my computer is sitting on is made from plant material. The house that I'm in as well. And there are important industrial processes that utilize plant materials. We now make synthetic rubber, but rubber is originally a plant material. There have been several novel medicines developed, whether it was aspirin or some of the ones that we'll talk about later on in this slide, and a lot of other things that I'm not talking about yet. So preserving plant diversity is in our best is in our best interest, and it's in the best interest of the entire planet. So not only will it benefit us directly as human beings, for all of the reasons I've talked about above here, but plant biodiversity is critical to the health of the entire planet, and we live here, and we survive because we have, or at least because we have had and have benefited from, a healthy, diverse planet that provides all of these things for us. Now, aside from some of the specific things that I just talked about, like our food and building materials, there are these direct benefits for a biodiverse planet, and these also directly benefit us, but they're topics I want to focus on because they benefit us in ways that aren't as direct in some cases. In other ways, they're just as direct, but they also benefit the future of the planet. And so we're going to get through and talk about each of these. We're going to talk about genetic diversity and pollinators and seed dispersal and how biodiversity helps that. We're going to talk about novel medicine discoveries that happen due to biodiversity and due to that come from plant conservation, or at least give us a reason to conserve plants in the future. We can talk about this biodiversity and plant conservation and how that improves our soil health and water quality, and why we should care about that. And then this one that maybe you don't expect, but something called ecotourism. And there are a lot of ethics associated with ecotourism, and it gets into economics a little bit, so I'm not going to dig in very deeply, but on a surface level, we'll talk about some of the benefits of this topic of ecotourism, and we'll also talk about why we should care about it. And we'll talk about the ethics of it a little bit. Okay, genetic diversity. Now we've got here on this slide all horticultural plants. Now this is my background, so it's easy for me to talk about, and also I love food. But plants that are used by humans as food is something I've always been interested in. Now, on the left, you'll see some different photos with letters above them. And these are all different species or types of banana. Now, to talk a little bit about the history of banana, it is important for you to understand why I have these pictures here. So, with bananas, we used to eat a very delicious banana that is no longer with us because there was a fungal disease that came and wiped it out. Now, the question is, how did this happen? Well, bananas are a triploid. The bananas that we eat are a triploid hybrid that are all clones of one another. And this is done because native bananas have very large, hard black seeds, and the little black flecks you see inside your banana are the remnants of those seeds. So, a fungal disease comes, and this one type of banana is very susceptible to this fungus. Now, that means that all of the banana species are completely wiped out because they're all genetically identical clones of one another. Now, right now, we have a similar situation brewing with some of our current banana that we eat, and it is also the same triploid clone, same type. It's not the same clone, but it's a clone like the other one was. And so we have banana breeders that are trying desperately to combine banana species into a different clone, but maintain the taste, texture, and shelf life that we've come to appreciate with modern bananas. So without genetic diversity, we wouldn't be able to do this. If we didn't have a lot of different kinds of bananas out occurring naturally in the wild, then we couldn't breed ourselves a new banana when ours goes extinct. Now, this also touches on why genetic diversity is so important in plant species, because if one type of species is susceptible to a disease, there are other relatives, usually, but not always, but sometimes, that can fill that niche that those plants were in when those ones go extinct or when they suffer from some sort of pathogen that wipes them out. And quite frankly, the whole idea behind genetic diversity is that those plants have something called hybrid vigor, that they've been breeding with each other, that there's a large gene pool and there's a lot of genetic variation within individuals within a population. And that large amount of genetic diversity as a population provides resistance for and against diseases and things like that. So that's a large part of why genetic diversity is so important. To the top right, those are peppers. And they're all different varieties. Let's see if there's there are basically three species of peppers that we as human beings consume. One is peppers like habaneros. One is peppers that represent everything for banana peppers, cayenne peppers, bell peppers, jalapeno peppers, things like that. And then there's actually an alternative, a third species of pepper that we don't really eat very much here, but that originated or that is in South America. And from those three species, the literal thousands and thousands of types of peppers that we consume have been bred by us, and that wouldn't be possible without the tremendous amount of genetic diversity that existed within the populations of those three species. And we're able to select for the traits that we want and breed them into different kinds of chilies. Likewise with corn, and corn actually started as an entirely different plant that wasn't particularly edible, and we've bred into these large kerneled, large, delicious, I think. Actually, I bet most of these corn down here in the right are probably pretty hard to eat. They look like popping corns, ornamental corns, grinding corns, things like that. Some of the more native corns, but anyways, excuse me. Anyways, you get the idea. Genetic diversity is important, and if we don't preserve some of these endangered species, we lose genetic diversity within that population, as well as genetic diversity within that genus, that plant family, etc. So another aspect of biodiversity that's important is preserving pollinators and methods for seed dispersal. And if we look here, these are pretty small, but essentially we've got different insects like butterflies and beetles, wasps, birds, bats, and bees of all kinds. There's also flies. I said flies, but there's a lot of different insect species that pollinate the various insect and animal species that pollinate the various flowers that plants produce. And there are some very specific relationships between insects or other invertebrates or birds or bats that exist between, one or two pollinators and one or two plants. And so a loss of any one of these individuals out of the ecosystem could result in the removal of its corresponding species. An example is dodo birds ate a specific kind of seed. That seed passed through its digestive tract, and then that tree then grew from that processed seed. So there's an example of not a pollinator, but a seed dispersal agent, that when those went extinct, that tree then later went extinct as well. And so there are these mutualistic relationships between plants and animals that if they are disrupted, that it can affect either species dramatically. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about soil health and water quality, both in reference to why you should care in general, and then also I'll talk about it in reference to plant conservation and plant biodiversity. So, healthy soil, you can see there's a lot of factors here. We see nutrient cycle, plant protection, pathogen suppression, detoxifying, influencing the atmospheric composition, decomposing residues, filtering water, storing water, allowing water to flow, and aggregates to form. There are entire classes. I took an entire class in graduate school that was just about soil biology and specifically about soil health and nutrient cycling. That said, I'm not going to get into that. It's important, though, for you to note that the root systems that are inside the soil from plants provide structure so that it stores water, and it also provides a way for water to break down through the soil. Okay, and this soil that is now comprised of root pieces and rock pieces has aggregates. So there's space for oxygen, and there's space for nutrients, and there's space for water to go, like I said. So this increases the plant health. Plants need oxygen, plants need nutrients, plants need water, and so there are different plants that are adapted to do different things within the soil structure. For example, one of those says N fixation, which is nitrogen fixation, and members of Fabaceae, members of the pea family, have a very specific function fixing nitrogen. There's a bacterial relationship specific to Fabaceae and pea plants, for agricultural purposes. Let's say soybeans, when they do crop rotations, they'll make sure soybeans are being rotated because those pea plant, the Fabaceae, that's where soybeans are, they fix, they fix nitrogen into the soil, and plants use nitrogen to grow. If you've taken chemistry, or you've taken any biochemistry, or even just some of the basic classes, think about what parts of your cells use nitrogen, and it'll make a lot more sense. So it's very important for soil health that there's a variety of plants, because each plant species, in a slightly different way, occupies a soil structure and adds to it. Now, on the right there's someone with a water quality meter, and I actually think I got this picture from an article about how water quality is declining. Now, water quality can be affected by agricultural runoff, which we'll talk about later, and some agricultural runoff can be prevented by healthy soil. And water quality can also be influenced by the plant species that are present or aren't present in the sides of the waterways. There are some plants that act as filters. There are wetlands areas that act as filters to larger bodies of water, and some of the plants that either hold or break down some of these compounds that can influence water health. So having a diverse ecosystem and a plant community next to waterways will improve the water quality. And likewise, having diverse systems within soil banks will improve the quality of the soil, the structure of the soil, and our ability as human beings, if we choose to do so, to utilize that soil to grow food. Okay, ecotourism is a complicated subject. And that's in part because there are some ethical concerns to ecotourism, and those can include, but aren't limited to, the exploitation of the environment, exploitation of native people where that environment is found. It's often that some of our most diverse and interesting to visit ecotourist locations have low-income, vulnerable populations that live around them and are involved. Not always, and I don't want to make generalizations, but there are a lot of people that the local communities are deeply benefited by ecotourism, whether by those ecotourist venues hiring local workers, or because ecotourism brings awareness to those ecosystems, or because ecotourism brings people that stay in hotels and buy food in areas surrounding these conservation sites. There are a lot of reasons why ecotourism, there are people that will tell you that it is a good thing. And I think that in a lot of ways, because of the way that economies work on the world scale and on national scales, ecotourism is a way for these places to generate income that allows them to perpetuate and allows them to be saved, for lack of a better word. So, going to Costa Rica, going to Southeast Asia, and some of these places that are incredibly biodiverse is a way that people can go and they can experience how incredible a biodiverse location is, and it can get people to be thinking about how their own plant communities where they live are comprised. So without biodiversity, these fragile ecosystems die. So if we don't conserve some of the key species in these ecosystems where ecotourism is, and obviously where all of these, I don't want to say that ecotourism is more important than the fact that these are complex, incredible ecosystems. I'm just saying that ecotourism does collapse as these genetically diverse, biodiverse places are either destroyed by invasive species, by logging, by deforestation. There's some things that we're going to talk about that can be bad. Right now we're kind of talking about all the good things that happen because of biodiversity. But again, plant conservation does lead to economic benefit in some of these communities, is really what I'm trying to focus on. All right, one of the bullet points I talked about earlier was the discovery of novel medicines. And so that brings us to the island nation off the coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean called Madagascar. Madagascar is an incredibly biodiverse place, and it is suffering, like many biodiverse places, from habitat loss through deforestation and other means. We'll talk a little bit more about why this happens later in the deforestation slide. So this rosy periwinkle, that cute little flower you see right there, is a traditional medicine that was used by indigenous people for centuries. And it was used to treat a variety of illnesses and afflictions, and it was finally studied for the first time in the West during the 1950s. And those two novel compounds that I'm not going to try to read were identified and later developed into anti-leukemia drugs. And these leukemia drugs were directly related to the likelihood of remission of leukemia in children increasing by 85% between 1960 and 1985. So those little pink flowers saved a lot of lives and children's lives. And this is just one example of thousands of traditional medicine or plant compounds that have been used by humans, not just indigenous people in the area, but have been in modern times taken by the West and turned into medicines like anti-leukemia drugs and things like that. And not always the West, but a lot of times it's U.S. and Canadian companies or European companies that take these indigenous medicines and distill them into compounds and study those compounds in labs for a variety of reasons. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about threats to biodiversity, some of the reasons why for plant conservation. We didn't talk enough, obviously, about the benefits because there are so many, but I think we will touch on more benefits as we talk about the threats. And also we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons why these things happen, because it's in some cases like deforestation, for example, there are a variety of circumstances that lead to those things, and even with invasive species. So the first one I want to focus on is overexploitation, and that is the overharvesting, overcollecting, overuse of a species. And obviously we're going to focus on plant species, but this can be fishing, this can be collection of any kind. The next one is agricultural runoff from fields and other types of agriculture, and we'll get into that in quite a bit of detail. Climate change we will touch on, but that's such a large topic that affects every aspect of the planet, that affects every one of these bullet points, and it really is one of the largest threats to biodiversity. We'll talk about deforestation and habitat loss and what causes it, what's leading to it, and how drastic it's been in the past years. And finally, we'll talk about invasive species as they have an influence on some very specific areas, as well as there are a few species that are becoming widespread everywhere. We're not necessarily going to be talking about weedy species here, but we're going to be talking more about some of the damaging invasive species.